So we got lots of clips for you this morning from the debate last night, so don't worry if you missed it or you decided to do something else like watch Kevin O'Sullivan on the political asylum. You won't miss a thing. You'll be able to go to work and you'll still have it all. Scarlett Maguire's here. Scarlett, very good morning to you.
Morning.
Very nice to see you. You've probably been up quite late last night figuring out what was going on. Let's kick things off, shall we say, straight away with what everyone is saying is the thing that Keir Starmer didn't answer the question on, and that was his possibility of raising taxes.
Taxes are now being cut. Keir Starmer would put all that progress at risk. He would put up everyone's taxes by £2,000. £2,000 in higher taxes for every working family in our country. After all the hard work and sacrifice we've been through, that's not the right course of action. I don't know why you want to put up people's taxes.
Keir Starmer.
Paul, I just don't know how you feel when you hear a Prime Minister say, having heard what you're going through, that the plan is working, it's all right. I meet so many people who are struggling with their bills, and the Prime Minister just keeps saying he lives in a different world, that
But Keir Starmer, if people are struggling with their bills, why do you want to make it harder for them by saddling them with £2,000 worth of higher taxes?
Scarlett Maguire here from JL Partners. What did you make of that exchange? Because it seemed as though Rishi Sunak, uncharacteristically, was quite aggressive.
Yeah, Rishi Sunak was definitely, I think, on the front foot throughout this debate. He had to be. It was much more important for Rishi Sunak that he got a clear win out of last night's debate than it is for Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer's perfectly happy coasted along at 20 points ahead in the polls. Yeah. It was Rishi Sunak that needed to turn this around. And this is what they think is a very, a weak spot for Keir, which is that this anxiety that the public have in the back of their mind about Labour generally with the economy and with taxation, and with Keir Starmer specifically because he's not giving much away about what he's actually going to do. Right.
And the thing about some of the papers this morning is they're basically saying that there's a big question over this tax question because it was £2,000 for every family that Rishi Sunak said he would raise. And it wasn't until much later in the debate when he called it garbage. But 2 or 3 times he had a chance to rebut it, and he didn't.
Yeah, and I thought that was odd. I also thought it was odd that he stood behind the podium and said, I will raise specific taxes as well, which is it's an odd thing to gift the Conservatives to be able to clip up and sent round ad infinitum. So no, I think that was very striking. The Conservatives will be wanting to make a lot of hay with that. Yeah. I don't think it's still enough. I still don't think enough was done last night for Rishi Sunak to really turn his fortunes around. It's been a bad campaign so far. Nigel Farage made it a lot worse for him. Yeah. But yes, no, they'll be trying to run with anxieties about Keir Starmer on economy and on the immigration.
Yeah, and the funny thing about the debate last night was that a lot of people were watching the format of it. I don't know whether all debates will be this kind of format where they had questions coming from the audience, and that Paula woman, as he was answering there, had basically said, look, I can't make ends meet. I've got my kids have all grown up, they've all left home. I did work a lot more than I do now. My savings are all gone. I'm having to batch cook to keep everything going. I haven't really got the ability to keep my head above the water. And both of them weren't very good at answering that particular question, were they?
I don't think either of them were very good, but I think Keir Starmer still came off slightly better from that exchange, partly because of pre-existing sort of conceptions of Rishi Sunak, which is that voters overwhelmingly tell us again and again and again he's out of touch, and that matters because when people are feeling hard up, they don't think he knows or understands and therefore can't really do anything about it. I think Keir Starmer came across a little bit better at showing a little bit of empathy, although we heard that toolmaker line again and again. Now, Labour will be repeating that for a reason. That's because that will we're bored of it. We've heard it so much. The public haven't heard that much of it yet, and they like it. They think it makes it seem more relatable. We'll see, but no, I think what we saw overwhelmingly last night was what we knew already, actually, which is that neither of these two leaders are particularly popular with the public. Neither of them are that great to watch on TV. We've got more of these to come. Let's see how we feel then.
Yeah, absolutely right. Let's see what they had to say about immigration, which is obviously a big battleground.
What will you do with illegal migrants who come here? What will you do with them?
Would you consider processing asylum claims in a third country, Keir Starmer?
Yes, if that was possible to do it in compliance with international law, of course. But just let me deal with this, because...
So you do now agree?
So you...
Honestly, now you've just changed your mind.
I thought we were not going to talk over each other.
So you do now agree with third country deals?
So he does now agree with third country deals, and it was like somebody described it as if it was almost as if you were watching this without knowing who either man was. Keir Starmer looked more like the man in charge, and Rishi Sunak looked more like the challenger. which was interesting.
Well, I mean, and that's actually something they're quite keen to portray, I think. They want Rishi Sunak to seem like the underdog, the fighty underdog during this campaign. And it's an extraordinary thing to be in, though, because this campaign was his choice. He went to the polls when he was 20 points behind before he had to. He is now in this position where he has to call it back. He hasn't been able to so far. Immigration's a tricky issue for both candidates. We saw that there with Keir Starmer. Rishi Sunak was trying to say, oh, look, he's changed his mind, which we know voters worry about with Keir Starmer. They think he changes his mind too much. And have anxieties about that. But it's not easy for Rishi Sunak either. Voters are not happy, generally speaking, with the Conservatives' record on immigration. And Nigel Farage will be, prosecuting the case against Rishi Sunak just as much as Rishi Sunak's trying to against Keir Starmer.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And one of, I suppose, and this is where your area of speciality comes in, one of the interesting things will be to see how the public reacts. I mean, the initial reaction in The Sun this morning is that, the people think that Rishi Sunak won that debate. But whether it moves anything or whether it changes voting preference at all is an unknown, isn't it?
I think it's an unknown, but I have a hunch, which is I think that it hasn't moved it much at all. I think that, again, Rishi Sunak needed a big win. Keir Starmer needed a score draw. I feel like we've basically come out with a score draw. Either way, I don't think it's decisive.
There was one poor moment for Rishi Sunak, and that was about NHS waiting lists.
But what Keir Starmer didn't mention to you, which you did, Julie.
Waiting list 7.2 million, they're now 7.5 million. He says they're coming down, and this is the guy who says he's good at maths.
Yeah, they are now coming down. They are now coming down.
7.2 when you said you get them down. 7.2 million, they're now 7.5 million. I'd like you to explain how they're coming down.
Because they were coming down from where they were when they were higher.
7.2.
And they're now on their way down. They are down, right? Yes, because the NHS was impacted by industrial action. And if it wasn't for that, 500,000 appointments would have been saved.
So it's somebody else's fault.
I mean, that was probably low point for Rishi Sunak, wasn't it? Where the audience was sort of groaning as he tried to mention the strikes and say that they were to blame, and laughing when he said, well, of course they were coming down when they were going up.
Yeah, I mean, and this is something that Rishi Sunak and the government sort of have again and again and again. They made these 5 promises that were quite binding to the public and quite hard to achieve, and they've not really delivered on most of them, and they're trying to now fight the case that they sort of have in some way or another. But people don't like when people try and sort of weasel their way around something. They say, well, we can see quite clearly. The NHS is a really interesting one. Every single focus group you go to now, someone has a story about the NHS not working for them or for a loved one, and it's hugely important to people. Neither parties have actually talked that much about it, given how much of a concern it is. And I think that's part of the reason why that elicited such a groan. People think, again, you're not really paying attention to what we're saying.
No, listen, I mean, we have it now on a daily basis. We have somebody giving us either a story, whether it comes in on a voice note, whether it's a caller, with a terrible story about the NHS, about something that's been delayed or something that's been put off or something that went wrong, and it seems as though now people only are expecting to be lucky and have a good experience with the NHS.
Yeah, and I do think there's something that's really changed as well. And actually, people might say, OK, well, Labour's always had the edge on the NHS as an issue. It's one of the few things that voters have always trusted Labour a lot more to deal with. But actually, the NHS is so, I think, or the not functioning of the NHS is so fundamental to people's sense that the country isn't working. That's something that we've seen Labour try and run with, this idea that Britain is broken. I'm sure that line came from a focus group. But and the NHS is fundamental to that, because every time, as you say, you're hearing more and more and more. Every time people interact with it, it's almost like a given that it won't work for them. And the problem is with that, obviously, healthcare stakes are so high.
Well, we saw the story yesterday. Something like 900,000 people last year opted to go to private healthcare, not because they had medical insurance, but because they just were so frustrated by the NHS that they needed to get something done, and they were willing, if necessary, to pay for it themselves. One interesting thing that came out yesterday was something that also we'd never heard from Keir Starmer, and this was about private healthcare. Have a look at this.
If you had loved ones on a long waiting list for surgery, would you, if you felt that that was the only way forward, use private healthcare? Rishi Sunak?
Yes.
Keir Starmer?
No.
Absolutely no if your loved one was on a waiting list for surgery?
No.
Thank you very much.
I don't use private health.
Okay.
I use the NHS.
The NHS has become this ridiculous kind of behemoth that hangs over Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak, doesn't it? Because not only do they talk about it a lot, but they have to make sure that they're sort of connected to it. We had Rishi Sunak saying, "Oh yeah, my father was a chemist," and or doctor, or my mother was a chemist, and Keir Starmer saying, "My mother was an NHS nurse, and my wife works in the NHS." It's all slightly kind of designed to make you feel like they're part of the NHS, when neither of them are really.
No, I mean, and that's something that they both want to sell a lot, isn't it? Is that they both think they actually have quite good backstories, despite Rishi Sunak's phenomenal wealth now, as they're both keen to plug that. I'm not convinced how much that matters. I think, again, people do like Keir Starmer's, at least when he can make it seem like sort of more humble upbringing. If he struggled with bills, I think that would have gone down well, him saying that. But the connection to the NHS is an interesting one. I do think public opinion towards the NHS is an interesting thing at the moment, and it will be very sort of interesting to see what Labour does with this when they're actually in government. We are presuming they will be in government. For the first time ever, people are starting to, when you poll them, say that the NHS compares less favourably to other systems in Europe, for example. That's a very interesting place for the British public to be in. I'm not saying that they don't still feel hugely protective over the NHS. People do. People are still terrified that it might be privatised, for example. But there is probably a pathway through for someone to do something about it. It's just about whether any of these politicians are going to be brave enough to do it.
Yeah, indeed. Well, Wes Streeting, of course, has been quite upfront about the fact that Labour recognises that the NHS does not work as well as it should, and that parts of it may well need to be privatised, parts of it may well need to be completely and utterly reformed. So Labour is less now, I think, anti the privatisation of bits of it than it was under Jeremy Corbyn. Yeah,
I mean, absolutely. I think that's probably not difficult given Jeremy Corbyn's stances on most things. But no, it's interesting. Labour's actually, Wes Streeting in particular, has taken a relatively punchy tone on this. Again, given how nervous people have been before, I think it's true that, given people's underlying anxieties about the Conservatives and their handling of the NHS, it probably really would be only a Labour government that would be able to put through any substantial reform.
Right, interesting. So, I mean, the next debate, I suppose, will be the one that we look forward to, which will be Angela Rayner against Penny Mordaunt, which might be a bit more lively even than that one.
Yeah, I think you would hope that Angela Rayner versus Penny Mordaunt would be more lively. They're both interesting characters. They both, I think, want to have more of a voice in this election. That's something that we've sort of heard from people close to them. It is that debate where you have members of more of the parties represented, but that also means reform will be included, which throws another interesting grenade into the mix.
Yeah, absolutely right. There's plenty of grenades going around. Scarlett, thank you very much indeed. Scarlett Maguire, the Pollster Director at JL Partners.